Imagine this. You tell yourself you'll watch just one more episode. You glance at the clock. It's past midnight, but your thumb still presses play. Hours pass. You're tired. Your eyes sting. And yet something keeps you there. Watching, clicking, scrolling. You think it's willpower. You think it's choice. But what if it isn't? What if most of what you do isn't really decided by you at all? Inside your head, 3 pounds of soft gray tissue are working tirelessly. Around 90 billion neurons, each firing, connecting, whispering signals to the next. This is the organ that makes you who you are. Your thoughts, your emotions, your dreams, your fears, your sense of right and wrong. Everything you call me emerges from here. And yet, most of what your brain does, it hides from you. You have no idea that it's happening. You feel like you're in control. You feel like there's a you inside your skull, a commander, steering the ship, giving orders. But neuroscience is slowly revealing a different story. There is no single commander. The brain is more like a vast orchestra. Each region plays its own tune all at once, blending into a single song we mistake for a self. Sometimes, when that harmony breaks, we get a glimpse of the machinery underneath. Take sleepwalking, a simple word for a strange phenomenon. It happens to ordinary people, people who, in the middle of the night, rise from their beds and begin to move, to act, to perform complex behaviors while still asleep. They might walk into another room, open a door, or even paint a wall, all while their conscious mind remains completely gone. In a lab at Mount Sinai, neuroscientists attach sensors to the heads of sleepwalkers. The lines on the monitors begin to dance, blue for eye movement, black for brainwaves. Slowly, the patient drifts into deep sleep. The brainwaves flatten, slow, grow heavy, a sign of deep, restorative rest. But then, suddenly, a burst of activity. The eyes snap open, the body sits up. Movement begins. What's happening is bizarre. Half the brain has woken up, but the other half hasn't. The motor cortex, which controls movement, is alive. The visual cortex, which interprets what we see, is awake. But the prefrontal cortex, the region that handles awareness, decision-making, self-control, remains fast asleep. The part of the brain that says, "I am doing this," is offline. That's why a sleepwalker can perform actions they'd never consciously decide to do. The rest of the brain is running its routines, independent of the self. When they wake, they're bewildered. They see what they've done, a rearranged room, an open refrigerator, a painted wall, and say, "That wasn't me." But it was. Their body, their brain, their neurons, just not the conscious mind they identify with. It's a reminder that consciousness isn't an all or nothing switch. It's a fragile balance between parts of the brain that can easily drift out of sync. The illusion of being in control is just that, an illusion. There's another, even more dramatic example of that illusion breaking. Anesthesia. Imagine lying on a surgical table. The anesthesiologist tells you to count backward from 10. 10, 9, and then nothing. No sound, no time, no awareness. Hours later, you open your eyes, and it feels like a single second has passed. What actually happened during that blank space? Neuroscientist Emory Brown has spent years studying it. He uses electrodes to monitor the brain's activity as patients slip under anesthesia. When awake, the brain looks alive. A storm of activity, hundreds of regions talking to each other, exchanging information. But as the drugs begin to take effect, that storm quiets. The waves slow. The communication fades. The thalamus, a walnut-sized structure deep in the center of the brain, acts as the main relay hub. Every bit of information from the senses must pass through it to reach consciousness. The anesthetic drugs silence the thalamus. The connections between brain regions dissolve. The body remains alive. The neurons still fire, but the dialogue that creates awareness, the conversation that gives rise to you, goes dark. Then, when the drugs fade, the signals start to connect again. Complexity returns. You wake, confused, unaware that you ever left. It's not that consciousness disappeared, it just lost its communication lines. For neuroscientists, that line between being conscious and unconscious isn't a mystery of existence anymore. It's a measurable shift in information exchange. Yet it leaves a haunting question. If consciousness is just connectivity, then who or what is the I that experiences it? If you sever the links between the brain's halves, something even stranger happens. In rare cases, patients with severe epilepsy undergo a procedure that cuts the corpus callosum, the thick bundle of nerve fibers connecting the left and right hemispheres. It's a last resort treatment to stop seizures from spreading. But what it reveals about the mind is astonishing. After the surgery, patients appear normal. They can speak, walk, think. But when scientists test them carefully, the cracks begin to show. Each half of the brain starts operating independently. The right hemisphere controls the left hand, the left hemisphere controls the right. Each side sees only half the world, and each seems to have its own consciousness. In one experiment, a patient was shown the word Texas only to his right hemisphere, the one that can't speak. When asked what he saw, he said, nothing. But when asked to draw what he saw using his left hand, controlled by that silent right hemisphere, he drew the word Texas perfectly. Then, when asked to draw something related to it, he sketched a cowboy hat. He didn't know why he drew it. His left hemisphere, on the side that speaks, invented an explanation saying he thought of cowboys for no reason. But the truth was simpler. His right hemisphere had seen the word. It knew. It just couldn't talk. Two minds, one body. One knows, one speaks. And together they pretend to be one person. These patients live their lives normally, yet inside them, two centers of awareness quietly coexist. The left brain interprets, rationalizes, invents stories to explain behavior it didn't initiate. It's the narrator of our lives, constantly stitching a story that feels unified. It insists on believing in a single self, even when evidence shows there are multiple. That, perhaps, is the brain's greatest illusion, unity. Because even without surgery, we are all divided. Different brain systems argue and negotiate with each other every moment. Emotional impulses rise from deep structures like the amygdala, while logic and restraint come from the prefrontal cortex. The result isn't one voice making choices, but a parliament of impulses, some ancient, some modern, debating endlessly, and the loudest one wins. We think of consciousness as command, but it's really compromise. So when you say, I decided, what you really mean is that billions of neurons, each following chemical rules, reached a consensus that your mind later turned into a story. The storyteller lives in your left hemisphere, explaining every move after it happens, never realizing it wasn't the author. You experience life as a single flow of thoughts and decisions, but underneath, it's chaos made coherent. And maybe that's what being human is, holding together all those fragments, believing they belong to one person. Maybe the illusion isn't a mistake. Maybe it's the only way the mind can bear to exist. When you lie in bed at night, half asleep, thinking about your day, the quiet sense of I who observes your memories and regrets isn't a solid being. It's a performance, a fragile synchronization of billions of tiny actors in the theater of your brain. Each plays its part for a fleeting moment before passing the signal along. You are not the conductor. You are the symphony. And yet, this symphony feels alive, whole and personal, as if it belongs to someone. But who is that someone? The answer might be far stranger than anything you've ever imagined, because the further we look into the brain, the clearer it becomes. The sense of control we cling to, the belief that I am in charge, might just be the brain's most beautiful necessary lie. And the question that begins to rise, softly but persistently, is this: if you are not fully in control of your mind, then who is? For a moment, imagine that everything you do, every word, every gesture, every decision, comes from one unified self. That's how it feels, doesn't it? A single voice in your head, an I, steering everything. But what if that sense of unity is just a story your brain tells you to keep you sane? What if the truth is that the mind you think you have is actually many? Inside the skull, two hemispheres live side by side, left and right, connected by millions of fibers known as the corpus callosum. Normally, they share everything, passing thoughts and sensations between them so seamlessly that we never notice the divide. But in a few rare people, that bridge has been cut, usually to treat severe epilepsy. And what's left behind reveals something deeply unsettling. When neuroscientists began studying split-brain patients, they discovered that each hemisphere can operate independently, even hold separate awareness. The left brain controls speech, logic, and language. The right brain sees patterns, emotions, faces. Together, they form the illusion of one conscious being. But split them apart, and you get something stranger. Two minds that share a single body, each with its own desires, memories, and understanding of the world. One of the most famous cases was a man named Joe. Scientists showed him the word Texas, but only to his right visual field, the side connected to the left hemisphere, the part that speaks. When asked what he saw, he said, Texas. But when they reversed it and showed the same word only to his left visual field, feeding his right hemisphere, the one that can't talk, he said he saw nothing. And yet, when they handed him a pencil and asked him to draw what he saw, his left hand, controlled by the right brain, sketched the word perfectly. When they asked him to draw something related, he drew a cowboy hat. Joe's left brain, the talkative one, didn't know why he drew it. So it made up a reason. I must have been thinking about cowboys. His speaking brain, unaware of what the silent hemisphere had seen, invented a story to explain behavior it didn't cause. That's what our brains do all the time. Even in you, right now. The speaking part of your mind, the narrator that explains your choices, is constantly stitching together reasons for things it didn't actually decide. It's not lying, it's filling in the gaps. When you reach for another cookie, your brain doesn't tell you, Dopamine surge from sugar triggered this behavior. It says, I deserve a treat. It's a storyteller weaving meaning from chaos. This is the foundation of the illusion of control. The rational mind isn't the pilot. It's the commentator, watching what the body and the unconscious brain have already done and pretending it was all part of the plan. And yet, somehow that illusion holds us together. Without it, the fragments of who we are might never feel whole. But the brain doesn't just invent unity, it also shapes personality, emotion, and morality, the things we think define ourselves. And sometimes, a single accident can shatter all of it. In 1848, a railroad foreman named Phineas Gage was working in Vermont. He was young, strong, and well-liked, known for being responsible and level-headed. One day, as he packed gunpowder into a rock, a spark ignited the charge. A steel rod over a meter long shot upward through his skull, entering below his left eye and exiting the top of his head. It destroyed much of his prefrontal cortex, the region just behind the forehead. Miraculously, he survived. He could speak, walk, and remember. But the man who woke up was not the man his friends knew. Before the accident, Gage was kind and disciplined. Afterward, he became impulsive, crude, and aggressive. He lost his job, alienated his friends, and drifted through the rest of his life. His body was intact, his intelligence untouched. But his personality had changed completely. That single event rewrote neuroscience. It showed that who we are, our temperament, our morality, our emotional control, isn't some invisible essence. It lives in the tissue of the brain. Damage the circuits of judgment and empathy, and you damage the very person you once were. A century later, scientists revisited Gage's case with modern imaging. They mapped the parts of his brain that had been destroyed and found that they connected deeply with emotional and social areas, the same networks that regulate guilt, empathy, and restraint. When those links were severed, Gage's emotions could no longer be balanced by reason. His impulses ruled unchecked. It was one of the first pieces of evidence that emotion and rationality are not enemies. They are partners. The prefrontal cortex helps you weigh your feelings, not suppress them. It's your inner thermostat, keeping you from freezing in detachment or burning up in rage. But even when the brain is whole, that balance is delicate. In experiments today, neuroscientists study how emotions like guilt and greed influence decision-making. In one such test, participants play a simple game. They're given money and can choose to invest it in another person. Whatever they invest grows, and then their partner decides how much to return. It's a test of trust, but also of conscience. When people act selfishly, keeping all the profit, their brains light up in areas tied to reward, the dopamine circuits of pleasure. But when they feel guilt, another region activates, the insula, deep within the brain. The insula registers that gut feeling, the discomfort of having violated your own moral compass. It's the brain's thermometer, sensing emotional temperature. And when that information is sent to the prefrontal cortex, the thermostat, it helps regulate behavior. It tells you, that didn't feel right. Don't do it again. Without that system, morality collapses into impulse. And yet, guilt, compassion, empathy, all of them are as physical as hunger or thirst. They're not abstract ideas. They're signals, chemicals, circuits firing in millimeters of gray matter. That realization can be humbling because it means that everything you love about being human, kindness, patience, creativity, loyalty, isn't floating somewhere in your soul. It's happening inside your skull. And if your brain shapes who you are, then your experiences, your memories, traumas, and relationships shape your brain. Every conversation you've ever had, every laugh, every heartbreak, every image you've seen, each of them has physically changed you. The connections between your neurons strengthen or fade, depending on what you focus on, what you repeat, what you feel. Your brain is plastic, not in the sense of artificial, but adaptable. It's constantly rewiring itself in response to life. Every time you learn something new, fall in love, or suffer loss, your neural map changes. The you that goes to sleep each night isn't exactly the same person who woke up that morning. But what happens when those experiences are extreme? And when they scar not just memory, but biology itself? What happens when trauma isn't just remembered, but inherited? That's what scientists are discovering now, that the pain of one generation can echo in the genes of the next. At the end of World War II, the Netherlands was cut off from food by Nazi forces. It became known as the Dutch Hunger Winter. Thousands starved. Decades later, researchers found that the children and grandchildren of those who survived were more likely to suffer metabolic disorders, as if the famine had left an imprint on their DNA. Neuroscientist Bianca Jones Marlin studies this phenomenon in animals to understand how trauma might cross generations. In one experiment, she exposed mice to the scent of almond paired with a mild electric shock. Soon, the mice learned to fear the smell. But what happened next was extraordinary. Their offspring, who had never experienced the shocks, were also afraid of the almond scent. Their brains contained more receptors for that smell. A literal biological memory passed from parent to child. Somehow, information about experience was written into sperm and egg, encoded not as words or images, but as chemistry. It was as though the memory of danger was preserved to protect the next generation. For humans, the same may hold true. The children of war survivors, refugees, or those who've endured trauma often carry traces of those experiences in stress hormones and brain activity, even in behavior. The past, it seems, doesn't always stay in the past. It becomes part of who we are, part of what our brains prepare us to face. And yet, despite all this, we continue to feel like we are in control, like we make choices freely and consciously from some central place of will. But the evidence keeps pointing elsewhere. Our decisions are shaped by emotion, molded by memory, bent by biology, and even influenced by ghosts of experiences that aren't ours. So when you say, I chose this, what are you really saying? Maybe choice is just the visible tip of a vast, invisible structure, the final flicker of a process that began long before awareness caught up. Maybe control is not something we have, but something we feel. And if that's true, then what does it really mean to say I? Because if we're honest, the I in our heads may be less like a captain steering the ship and more like a passenger watching the waves, believing it commands the sea. We like to believe that we are the authors of our own stories, that every choice we make is deliberate, every word, every movement, every dream, a reflection of our will. But when you look closely, the line between control and illusion begins to blur. Neuroscientist Uri Mayaz once said, agency is fragile. It's something we build second by second, and it can fall apart with the slightest interference. He wasn't speaking metaphorically. In his lab, he's shown how easily the brain's sense of control can be bent, or even fabricated. It begins simply. A volunteer sits in a chair with a small magnetic coil placed near their skull. The device is called a transcranial magnetic stimulator, TMS. It delivers focused magnetic pulses that can activate or silence parts of the brain. The subject is asked to move a finger whenever they feel like it. They do, a twitch, a small movement. But here's the twist. Sometimes the machine sends a pulse that makes the finger move involuntarily. Afterward, the participant is asked, who initiated the movement? Often they hesitate. Some say, it was me. Others say, it was both of us. Some say, I don't know. And the truth is, their brain can't tell the difference. The moment the muscle moves, signals race back to the brain and it builds a story. I decided to move. But if the signal comes from outside, from a magnetic field, not a conscious thought, the brain still tries to claim ownership. The sense of agency isn't just about what we do, it's about how the brain interprets feedback afterward. This experiment reveals a quiet secret. The feeling of control may not come before an action, but after it. The mind watches what the body does and retroactively assigns intent. It's as though the brain says, if my hand moved, then I must have decided to move it. That realization is both fascinating and terrifying. Because if our sense of control can be rewritten so easily, then how much of our daily life is truly under our command? Miles calls it the illusion of authorship. We walk through life believing we write our own script, but maybe our brain writes it first, and our conscious mind reads it afterward, pretending to be the author. Even illusions, though, can serve a purpose. Agency, that belief in control, is part of what gives life meaning. It connects cause and effect. It lets you feel responsible for your actions, proud of your successes, guilty for your mistakes. Without that sense, life would unravel into randomness. Some neuroscientists think consciousness itself evolved for that reason, not to make decisions, but to explain them, to build a coherent story from the billions of microactions happening below awareness. That's why, even when our sense of control is challenged, we fight to rebuild it. When something inexplicable happens, an accident, a tragedy, even a trick of fate, the first thing our mind does is search for meaning. Why did this happen? It's the brain's way of regaining agency, of pulling order from chaos. Perhaps that's what consciousness is. Not the driver, but the storyteller sitting behind the wheel, describing the journey as it happens, pretending to steer. But there's another side to control, one that shows that letting go of it can unlock extraordinary creativity. In a lab filled with wires and scanners, neuroscientist Charles Lim studies the brains of jazz musicians and freestyle rappers. His question is simple. What happens when we improvise? When we stop thinking and just flow? A rapper lies in an MRI machine, head perfectly still, microphone nearby. First, he's asked to recite a memorized verse, something practiced and familiar. His brain lights up in the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for planning, monitoring, and self-correction. Then he's told to freestyle, to make up lyrics on the spot. Something unexpected happens. The prefrontal cortex goes quiet. The region that normally monitors mistakes, the inner critic, shuts down. Other areas, especially those tied to language, rhythm, and emotion, come alive. It's as if the conscious overseer steps aside and a deeper part of the brain takes over, faster, freer, unfiltered. Lim calls this deactivation for liberation. By reducing conscious control, the brain becomes more creative. The same principle appears in athletes who describe being in the zone, where action feels effortless, as if something beyond thought is moving them. When we stop trying to control every detail, the unconscious takes over, and it often performs better. That's why overthinking can ruin a performance. A basketball player who makes 99 free throws in practice might miss under pressure because the conscious mind, desperate for perfection, interrupts what the body already knows. To perform at our best, sometimes we must surrender. It's ironic. The more we try to control, the worse we often become, and the more we let go, the more fluidly we act. Control, it seems, isn't about domination. It's about trust, trusting the parts of ourselves we don't fully understand. This balance between deliberate effort and unconscious flow defines much of human life. Too much control, and we freeze. Too little, and we drift. Somewhere in the middle, we find art, innovation, love, and meaning. But what about the darker side of the unconscious? The forces we inherit, the emotions we can't name, the patterns that repeat across generations? We now know that trauma can echo through time. A famine, a war, an act of violence. These events don't just scar memory. They alter biology. They leave chemical signatures on genes, turning certain switches on or off. Those patterns can be passed from parent to child, shaping stress responses and emotional sensitivity. It's as if the past whispers through DNA, guiding behavior without a single word. When Bianca Marlin discovered that the offspring of traumatized mice inherited their parents' fears, she described it not as destiny, but as a message. The brain and body adapt to prepare the next generation for survival. Even pain has a purpose. It carries information. If that's true, then the unconscious mind isn't just personal, it's ancestral. You're not only shaped by your own experiences, but by echoes of those who came before you. Their struggles, their resilience, their fears, all written in the code that built your brain. You are the sum of countless unseen forces, biology, memory, culture, and emotion, all converging in one fleeting consciousness that says, I. And yet, despite this complexity, we continue to act, to create, to dream. We continue to feel like we are steering. Maybe that's what makes the human mind so extraordinary. Not that it has control, but that it believes it does, and uses that belief to build civilizations, art, and love. When you think about it, this illusion of control might be one of evolution's greatest achievements. It gives us accountability. It gives us hope. It keeps us moving forward, even when we know so little of what drives us. Heather Berlin, the neuroscientist who explored these mysteries, once said, "Unconscious you is still you. The parts of your mind you don't control are not separate. They are part of the same vast system, the same you that dreams, that creates, that loves. The self is not a single flame, but a field of sparks. Each neuron, each thought, each inherited trace of emotion contributes to the glow we call awareness. And maybe that's the point. Maybe we are not meant to be entirely in control. Maybe we are meant to dance between the known and the unknown, to trust the hidden intelligence beneath consciousness. Because every act of creation, every decision, every heartbeat begins there, in the silence before thought, in the currents of a brain that never sleeps. You're not a puppet of your neurons, nor their master. You are their song. So the next time you catch yourself thinking, I am in control, remember, the truth is deeper and far more beautiful. The self you believe in is not an illusion to be exposed. It's a masterpiece of coordination, a harmony between chaos and order. The brain doesn't lie to you when it makes you feel whole. It gifts you that illusion so you can live. And perhaps that is what it means to be human. To live as both the dreamer and the dream. To walk through the world believing you're the author, even as unseen hands inside your own mind turn every page. So when you ask, who's really in control? Maybe the answer is simple. No one is. And yet, somehow, everything is. Because beneath the surface of awareness, your brain, that strange, silent engine of thought and feeling, is already writing the next line of your story. And it always has been.